We have got a couple of extra members from the Trellis staff team with us this evening, just to understand a bit better about what goes on in these meetings, instead of just hearing from Emma and I about these mysterious evening professional forum meetings. And it's lovely to see so many familiar faces here, and welcome to anyone who's attending for the first time. You're very welcome to be here.
Thank you.
I half expected there might be one or two people from Sweden joining us, because we did a lecture for the Swedish University at near Alnarp this week, and I mentioned it, and they were very, very keen. But maybe next time. So a very good evening to you all, and thanks for giving up an hour an hour and a half of a sunny spring evening to join us. We hope we'll make it worth your while. And it's really nice to have a good attendance, because this process is very consultative, and we want to make sure that that continues. There's no point in us all getting in a huddle and making up policies and coming up with new things that don't fit for the people working in the field. So it's lovely that you've all made time to join us. Thank you for that. We've got from the operational group, we've got Ben from Thrive, Christina Hughes-Nine, very hardworking volunteer and right wing woman really for Trellis and Thrive, and Emma Martindale from the operational group from Trellis, and also Lorna and Joe joining us from the Trellis staff as well, just to see what goes on. It's lovely to see you, Anna Baker Cresswell here, fresh from the conference, and Laura too. So you're all very welcome, and hopefully we've got some useful updates for you this evening. And we're going to get you thinking about a couple of subjects too, so don't think you can just sit here. You're going to be joining in participatory meeting for as much as possible. So since last meeting, I hope you've all had a good winter. We met last in December. Is that right? Yes, December, that long ago. And we've been working hard on the final draft, or the latest draft, of the Code of Ethics and the Standards of Practice. I hope you can remember that far back. We were revealing the latest work on that then. And we have also, well, really started off by Thrive, but we have got a draft of the competencies for practitioners as well, and a working group, volunteer working group, to look at that, developing that a bit further. We've had some good discussions about routes to recognition too, and we've put a lot of those materials on the webpage so people can have a look and send in their comments whenever they feel like it. We have had some responses to the standards, practice standards, but I think we might keep that open for a little bit longer, just to give people a little bit more time to send their comments in. But Ben is going to update you on that shortly, and Christina on the code of ethics, so I won't give you too much detail on that just now. We had a workshop about the professional association at the Trellis conference in March, and Emma and I ran that and just updated people on progress, and also invited questions and comments. And the overall impression was that people were very warmly appreciative of this and very positive about it. And we had some discussions about even some possible support for this work, so that was really heartening. And we had Dr. Carly Wood there as well, presenting her research about looking at the research evidence for therapeutic horticulture for depression and anxiety. And she was also looking at ways that she could find through her work to support this work for the professional association. So that was all really encouraging. And people could see the clear links between the evidence and the professional association and their day-to-day practice. So that was all really helpful to see that all coming together. People had a couple of questions about potential fees, and we realized we need to sort of try and do some sums and figure that out. It's really important to people. And we had people there who are coming into this field from other professions like dental nursing and so on. So they had an idea of what fees might have been in other sectors. So they were just curious about how that might work. In addition, we have now very excitingly, about 250 people on the forum list. So we may have maybe 20 people to each meeting, but there's a much wider group now of people who've signed up as interested in this field. And so we see a boost of about 10% after every one of these meetings, but we also see a boost after our conference. So it's really nice to see that people think this is valid work and want to be part of it, even if they're not able to come to every meeting and contribute to every consultation survey. There is also interest coming to us from some of the colleges that are teaching horticulture in Scotland. The HNC, or is it the next generation HNC qualification, has a module on social community and therapeutic horticulture. So it's very introductory, but the students are getting a feel for a taste for therapeutic horticulture and getting curious. So they are starting to be interested too and ask questions about the professional body. And although they're not all young people, some of them are career changers who are a bit older, it's really nice to see that that is a possible cohort of new people coming in to feed the profession and keep it alive and spread it and expand it. So that was really encouraging to see as well. Also, over the winter, we've been learning from other groups and other countries' registers or attempts at setting up professional support, and including some discussions with the AHTA in the US. But also, we had a visitor from the Australian Association, Tanya Bearup, who we took to visit. I know she came to see Thrive as well, and several other projects. I think she also came to see Joanna and maybe some others here. So we took her to two or three projects actually, two in Perth and one in Edinburgh. And we had some really interesting discussions about how they do things there. It's slightly different from our model. And we agreed to keep in touch and learn from each other. So it was really good to have her with us. And we ran a live networking event that was also online. So we've been busy, even if we haven't been having meetings all through the winter. And that's probably enough for me by way of an introduction. We're going to cover updates next on the Code of Ethics from Christina, and then we're going to come to Ben to hear about standards of practice. And then we're going to focus on supervision. So Emma and I are going to lead on that, but we will want to hear from you about your experiences of that and your thoughts about supervision. And then we're going to hear a bit more from Ben about practitioner competencies and the early work on that, before we kind of summarize and wrap up. So that's the rough plan. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Christina, who's going to update us on the work on the Code of Ethics. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Right, Code of Ethics. The draft was published and we got 31 responses to the draft, which was pretty good. And we're very appreciative, thank you, to everybody who took the time and the trouble to look at this rather dry but important stuff. Thank you in particular to the working group, Sally and Alison, who are here, and Catherine, who's not here today, but their time and commitment has really helped develop this. All the comments were actually read, considered and discussed, I can assure you, but I can also assure you that I'm not going to take you through them now one by one. I don't think that'd be a great use of anybody's time. One thing that has come out quite strongly is the relationship between the code and the standards of practice. And some comments, for example, were suggesting that there should be more details added to the code in various places. For example, that we have a reference to relevant disclosure checks. And someone said, well, that should be expanded to say what that actually is. No, we don't think so. We appreciate that the draft standards of practice weren't available at the time that the draft code was out there. So the relationship between them wasn't perhaps obvious. And our view has been that the code is a high-level statement of principles and the detail has to appear in the standards of practice. And that's something we'll be taking into account when reviewing the feedback on the draft standards as well. It's a balancing act to some extent, but broadly speaking, we think that's the appropriate division. So we've actually taken out some details that were in the draft code because they were too prescriptive. It wasn't the right place for them, such as using reference to using interpreters. People were pushing back on that and saying, oh, that's going to be problematic. Well, that doesn't need to be said as part of the general principle at stake. So the detail of that can go into the standards of practice. So we haven't chosen to add them in all places. There was one that I wanted to mention in relation to the requirement to tell the professional body if you're convicted of an offence, which we've now expanded to include a police caution, because you only accept a caution if you accept that you're guilty of the offence. And the question is obviously, well, what's the professional body going to do with that information? Well, they're going to use it to decide whether the person is a fit and proper person to be on the register for everyone's sake. That decision isn't going to be fairly made by having a blanket rule. And it's not even going to be fairly made by having a list of offences. You know, there are one or two obvious offences where you could say in all circumstances that would be relevant, but you can't do that across the whole slate of offences. That isn't the right way to go ahead. And so, again, that kind of detail isn't going to be there. But what I would add is that it's clear that, well, as people were saying in their comments, there will need to be a publicly available policy which sets out the approach that the professional body will be taking to the individual cases, and that it needs to be decided on an individual case. This would be the case when someone applies to be on the register, or when their registration comes up for re-registration. Maybe it's going to be an annual thing, the process isn't fully worked out, as well as if they're already on the register and this is something that happens. So there is going to be a separate policy for that. And although it is important, it's not going to be in the code itself. So headline changes. First, you might remember we asked for feedback on client-centred versus person-centred in the opening words. There was a clear preference for person-centred, which isn't very surprising. It's the predominant approach of STH practitioners. We have a holistic view of people and we approach them as individuals. And it's important that the opening words of the code reflect that. So with that change done, there are places in the code where client is still the appropriate word, because person wouldn't make sense or would be confusing in the context. But I think it's going to be pretty clear from the role definition, from the opening words and through the standards of practice and the competencies, that the holistic person-centered approach is the one that we're all taking. Other headlines. People had comments on the duty of candour and the scope of practice. And the comments there were very helpful and have led to clarification. It wasn't so much the underlying principle where there was disagreement, as to it was more about how it was expressed in each case, which is why consultation and draft is so important, because you know how it is. You can write something, you can agree amongst yourselves what you think it means, you put it out there, somebody sees it differently, they read it differently. That needs sorting out. And so we think we have it better now. Is the principle clearly enough expressed? That was what we're aiming to do. And finally, which takes me back to the beginning of what I was saying to some degree, we've changed what we had about confidentiality. You might remember that there were two alternatives in the draft confidentiality section. Neither of those was quite right. We got quite a lot of comments. And it is, of course, very important to have the relationship between confidentiality and safeguarding clearly stated. So that subsection is being amended with reference to the Caldecott principles, general principles, but with additional pointers and emphases in the code itself, which are relevant to this particular profession. Because people are coming to this profession, as we know, from all sorts of different backgrounds. It needs to be clear in the code what the principles are in relation to this situation, and supported and expanded again by detail in the standards of practice. So the documents will work hand in hand, with the code giving the general picture to practitioners, but also to members of the public, employers, anyone thinking of referring someone to a therapeutic horticulture project. And then the standards will be spelling things out a lot more. I think we're going to be putting the latest versions up together on the website after the responses to the standards of practice have been gone through. So it should be more evident how they, we hope, dovetail. And I think, as Fiona said, that it's not that they're going to be sort of like set in concrete, but we don't want to go round and round, lots and lots of iterations. So yes, if you see something that you think is a real problem, communicate with us, tell us, and we'll look at it. But it's not that we're asking for you to spend more time going over that one. The Standards of Practice survey is the one that's out there at the moment. So again, thank you. And that's all I wanted to say on it. Is there anything that somebody wants to ask right now about it? Okay, I don't see any hands going up. So I'll thank you. I'll mute myself and hand back to the next person.
Thank you, Christina. I'm going to hand straight over to Ben. He's going to talk about standards of practice. Thanks, Ben.
Well, thanks very much. Good evening all. It's great to see you. We've been doing a piece of work, as those of you who've kind of been on this journey for a little while will be aware, in relation to the standards of practice and kind of really looking at how STH practitioners will go about fulfilling their roles, and how STH practitioners will comply with the Code of Ethics as well. So it is looking at it, in terms of what the standards are, what the expectations are. So it's worded as such, we've now got that out published, so you're able to see it. You can download it from Trellis's website, and you can have a look at it there. So first of all, I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone who joined in with the work party, looking at the practice standards and really making it the document that it is, and also thanks to the operational team who kind of reviewed it and have put their input into it as well. So as I say, the draft's been published, the survey is available, and we're going to go through a similar process to what we've done in relation to the code. So we'll hear the survey feedback, and then we'll make further changes to the practice standards themselves. So big thanks to anyone who's already completed the survey. We haven't had a chance yet to analyse it, and we're going to extend the period of time for people to get their submissions in. If you want to give your feedback, then please can you do that by the 21st of April. That just gives us about 2 weeks, gets you past Easter. Easter's coming. If you haven't got your Easter eggs, then make sure you've got your chocolate eggs, because we're not far away, your hot cross buns and all of that. And yeah, so just past Easter, if you can get that in, that would be really helpful. So once we've got that feedback, we'll make some changes, we'll adapt it and develop it as we need. They're kind of, as Christina and Fiona have already talked about, these documents have got to work together. And so once we've been through that process, we'll look at the two documents, we'll see how they align, we'll see whether we need to make any changes or adapt them, really, so that the two documents kind of make sense as a whole, given that Christina and the working group there have looked at the code, and myself and the working group, we've looked at the code, the operational group, but we've got to bring that together and make sure it all works as a sort of cohesive whole. So we'll be doing that once we've been through that process, once we've got your feedback, and we'll make any changes as needed. So that's sort of giving you a bit of kind of background on the standards. It's really kind of getting close to kind of complete doc, and once we've got your feedback, we'll be able to kind of develop it further. So do get that in, and we're really looking forward to what you think about it, and hope that not only is it kind of helpful as having that document, but we really want to see it kind of shaping and helping us to support and develop the profession. I think, for us in Thrive, I know that we're going to be looking at that document, reflecting on our practice as an organisation and thinking, how does this align? Are there ways that we can develop what we do? Can we improve it? Are there, where are we strong? Are there elements that we need to do things differently? And, yes, look at it as a document, but also look at it in terms of supporting you to reflect on your practice, and whether there are, whether there are elements that you think, oh, actually, maybe I should focus on this. And, together we can start to elevate the standards. We can continue to push the profession forward, and to work to get that kind of consistent approach across all social therapeutic horticulture practice. So I think that sort of covers where we are with the standards. It gives you a bit of a background, and kind of the next steps in terms of the survey and feedback, and then we'll be republishing the document once we've been through those stages. So I'm going to hand back to Fiona, unless there are any questions. No? Okay, thanks very much, Sean.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, so that's great. Those two documents we anticipate will be ready in a good final draft form. I say final, they're always going to be open to consultation and change, but a good draft, as good as we can get it for now, and on the site in the first half of the year, probably sooner for the standards of practice. The code is very close to being ready. So they'll be there for you to look at if you want to use them to guide your practice, or to help think about some aspect of developing your project, or if you do suddenly think of something and want to check it's in there and then get in touch with us, that's fine. But they will, this sort of formal consultation phase will close, just so that we're not caught in a loop of endless edits by committee, which could go on ad nauseam, really. So that's great. We look forward to hearing what your thoughts are on these documents, and we hope that you recognise your own practice in them. If you don't, we're sort of slightly far off the mark and we need to know, but hopefully they don't look too far from what you already do in some form. Okay, well, as I mentioned, Emma and I would like to just take a bit of a closer look.
Sorry,
Sally,
yeah,
hello.
Sally's got.
Do you have a question, Sally, or a comment? We invite you to unmute.
Hi, sorry, just couldn't
right.
unmute. I was hunting around my screen for my mouse. Just a comment there about it would probably be a good idea to have a process by which you submitted a request to change those two documents, or have
A request to
a formal feedback mechanism where for reporting things you wanted to change or you had concerns with on those documents.
Okay, you mean beyond the survey, because there is a formal.
Yes, what I meant was you said that they're living documents, so people may well come across things that need to be added, and there needs to be a mechanism by which they can communicate that need. I would suggest, you've got the publication point, the Trellis website, so perhaps to have something set up there that people could submit on a form if they had something that they wanted considering. It would just be probably a better way than like emailing, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that might be easier for our website admin as well, actually. I can't see Lorna's face, but she's possibly screaming. At the moment, we've just had a major, painful website overhaul, and it's not done yet. But yeah, some kind of web form might be the answer there, and that's probably right.
That is typically what's done, in companies where you've got processes and procedures. You've got like a formal feedback mechanism. It probably should be something that we had as well.
And that keeps it away from our regular queries for the information service and so on. Yeah, we can certainly have a look at that for sure. Thank you. Okay. So Em and I wanted to cover supervision. Well, we all did. And Em and I decided we would just lead on this bit, just because I found it really helpful hearing from Emma's past experience of supervision in different roles. And also I've had some exposure to supervision in certain therapeutic professions and sectors and roles. We see supervision as being really important to this role, as it is in pretty much every therapeutic profession, as far as we understand it. And it is slightly different. Sorry if this sounds patronizing, but just to be clear, in case there's anyone here that's kind of new to the field, but it's different from supervision in other jobs that are not therapeutic, where you're maybe just being managed to make sure you're being productive or not being naughty and fulfilling your job description and following the rules. It's different in the sense that it encourages you to reflect on your practice. It should be a source of support for you to get some sort of help and input and new perspective on a particularly difficult situation, perhaps with a client, or something that's causing you some concern, or that you're perhaps taking home with you, or is spilling over into other aspects of your thinking. It should be something that also helps you keep on top of anything that might be bothering you, that might be spilling over into your professional work otherwise. And it should help you just keep up to date with standards of practice and other considerations of good practice. So it's something that should be there to support you, but also to help ensure that you provide a good service that supports your clients. And so it's different in that sense from regular supervision in a regular job. It's kind of focused on therapeutic elements a lot more than other aspects of the job. And so in some therapeutic professions, this is a requirement, and you have to have a certain minimum amount. For example, every 40 hours or once a month, you need to have supervision for yourself. And this is specified, for example, for the BACP, the Counsellors and Psychotherapists Association. Now, in our field, everything's so new and people are coming from so many different backgrounds that we think that wouldn't be appropriate to insist on this and specify a minimum amount. But we do want to encourage people to include or find a way to get supervision they need to do their job well, and to think about what that might look like for them, and to try and make sure that that's built into any role that they go to. And we appreciate that it can be difficult to do that if you're working in quite an isolated or a small voluntary sector setting. So there are some ways to think about that and to maybe work around that, and workarounds essentially to that, if that's your situation. So we just wanted to share some slides and have a think about how it might look for you, and for Emma to start off and give us a sort of introduction to supervision. So I'm just going to share some slides. So if you bear with me a couple of seconds till I get those organized. Here we go. And just going to get rid of this bar. And start the slides. Can everyone see the slides okay? Yeah, great. It's just a bit slow, Emma, sorry. So it'll take a moment to begin the slideshow. This is what happened this morning, sorry.
I can see them fine, Fiona, if that helps.
Yeah, it's just, I'm trying to go into slideshow mode and start.
I see.
And it's just very slow and buffering, which happened this morning.
That's fine, mobile. Oh, you're there. Great. Thanks, Fiona. Nice to see you all. Hope you're well, and thanks for joining us this evening. We wanted, like Fiona said, we wanted to include a bit of discussion around supervision this evening because, well, one, we haven't covered it yet, and two, we know that it's an important part of our practice in terms of keeping the public safe and making sure that clients get benefit from our service, but also just for us as practitioners in terms of our resilience and our well-being. But we do know that supervision might not be happening for some people at all, or it might be very sporadic, or some people might be receiving really great supervision. And so we just wanted to kind of understand a little bit more about your supervision. So just before we go into that, the sort of language around supervision is interesting, and there's lots of different definitions we can look at. And I think this is something that we can do some more work on over the next few months or years, sort of trying to firm up what supervision should look like for our profession rather than looking at other professions, because there may well be some differences. But for now, we thought that this definition was quite a helpful one. So it says supervision is a joint endeavour in which a practitioner with the help of a supervisor attends to their clients, themselves as part of their client-practitioner relationships and the wider systemic context. And by doing so, improves the quality of their work, transforms their client relationships, continually develops themselves, their practice and the wider profession. I think that misses the bit about practitioner well-being and practitioner resilience. I think we can definitely make adaptations to what we think the definition should be for our supervision as we go along. But I think the important thing here is that little diagram. I hope you can all see it over on the right-hand side, which was from a training course that I did a few years ago about effective supervision, and it helped me think a bit more about what supervision might look like when it's not on a formal one-to-one basis. So it might be that you have one-to-one supervision that's very planned, or it might be that you have some formal and some informal supervision, or perhaps you have it at the moment, it just happens on a kind of ad hoc basis. But also that supervision might not be just with your line manager. It could also be with colleagues. It could be part of a group. In a previous job, I was part of a peer group supervision. where it was just colleagues together, or it might take some other kind of format. Perhaps if you're self-employed, you're seeking out supervision elsewhere. So it's just for us to start to imagine what it could look like, I guess, in an ideal basis, and also different forms it might take. I think some people are having a little bit of trouble with my sound, so apologies if you are. I wouldn't say too much more. So we wanted to get you to have a little think about what supervision looks like for you now. And if anyone's willing to tell us about that, that would be great. And maybe when you're doing that, you could tell us about what's worked and what hasn't. And then we can move on to that final question afterwards. So I wondered if we had any volunteers who would like to tell us about what their supervision looks like at the moment, whether it exists or doesn't, and what works and what doesn't. You could maybe raise your hand if you'd like to speak to us about that.
There's Anna.
Sorry, typical me jumping in first. To me, the most important thing of all when it comes to supervision is regularity. Because I think if people have got something on their mind, it's important that they know that when the opportunity to talk about it will be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does, Anna, doesn't it? It's like knowing that you're not going to have to hold something for weeks and weeks and weeks, and if you haven't got a moment to grab someone, that it is, you have got supervision in your diary, and that's going to be your chance to kind of download anything that's going on. Yeah. Thank you. That's helpful. Would anybody else like to add anything? Just having a look in the chat.
Laura.
Hi.
Hi, Laura.
So I'm just thinking that this might not be possible, but part of my working week is that we've timetabled it so that there's 2 mornings a week where I'm working with the project team. So we have that regular time, we have that regular slot every week. And like I said, I'm actually in a project team. So if if you're working individually, it's not so possible, but that works really well because I know that on a Monday morning or a Friday morning, I can discuss everything and anything that's come up during the week. So that is really helpful. And sometimes we don't have time to cover everything, but it's just knowing that's there. So I think that's already been mentioned, but you're not carrying things for too long, and that the support is there. It's really helpful.
Yeah, I think that is important, especially when we're sometimes working in quite scattered working arrangements, with hybrid working, maybe over several sites, maybe on our own without anyone on site some days. It's really good to have that structure and just make sure the timetable allows for it so that, like everyone says, we're not holding on to stuff and thinking, oh, it can't come soon enough, I need to talk to someone, and bottling it up. But also just so that we don't let it lapse and become complacent about it, because that is another thing that happens when you've got so much urgent professional work to do. It can be easy to think, oh, well, I'll just skip on my own supervision for now, and then it becomes a habit. So yeah, that regularity and scheduling is really important. Leila.
Hi, everyone. I was thinking, for instance, in my case, I have no one at work that can supervise me in this field. So how can we support people like there are in my case? Could it be interesting when we register with the association, pay a fee for someone who can be a supervisor in that case? Yeah, that's an open question.
This is something we have talked about. Emma, would you give some thoughts on that, as well as the ideas we've talked about, like close to what Leila just suggested, but also the ways that you've seen it organised in other jobs?
Yeah, so I think, so I'm in that position sometimes as well, not when I'm with Trellis, but on my other days, Leila. And I think in a previous role, the association that I was a part of, we could join a local peer group supervision, but it was chaired by an experienced practitioner who could kind of I guess, facilitate those discussions and make sure that people were all having a chance to speak. And I know that other professions also sometimes seek out supervision more for their own well-being. So from a kind of other therapeutic profession. But I think it's definitely one that we need to think more about for this association in terms of people that are working independently, whether that's because they're the only practitioner in an organization or because they're self-employed. So coming up with some ideas to begin with, today it's really helpful, and I had that in my mind in terms of perhaps having some sort of online to begin with, peer group supervision that people could access as a start to make sure that people are getting something. And that might be something we can build on to make it more that could be face to face if people were all clustered around one area. Yeah, and then I think also for other organizations who do have maybe different types of practitioners working together, there are opportunities to have peer group supervision with different professions. That can be really helpful as well if you work as part of a multidisciplinary team. It doesn't have to be just you with an STH practitioner. It could be you with other health and care professionals that you work with. So I think I'm hoping that over time we can build up some maybe case studies and guidance around this so that it's something that people can refer to when they're in practice, and hopefully that helps them to get things up and running if they don't have supervision already. I can see there are a few comments in the chat as well.
Would you read those, Emma? And I'm just going to hear
Yeah.
from Alison. Let's take Alison's comment.
Hi, yeah, I think it's already it's much the same as other people have said, particularly for the vast majority of my work is sort of free range. And I haven't worked for an organisation, and back to what Layla was saying about, that becomes then very difficult if you're literally a one-man band, or but also this point about paying for it. So, for example, several years ago, I did a short one-term level 2 counselling skills course. I don't want to become a counsellor, but part of that was a sort of, if you want to go on and be a counsellor, then this is how it works. We did a lot about supervision and why it was important. And I was somewhat staggered to discover that it's mandatory, as you say, but also people, of course, the individuals have to pay for the supervision, and that's because the supervisor is an experienced counsellor, they're paying out more for the hours than they earn themselves as a counsellor, and that's quite a challenge, I think. I mean, like I say, I'm not a counsellor, so I haven't had personal experience, but I think the whole about paying and, how that's funded, and if you're working for yourself, that can be very, very challenging. And this idea of how much is mandatory to remain on the register. I'm fully in favour of supervision, but I think particularly, as other people have said, for the real, Lone Ranger, I think that can be quite challenging when you haven't got an organisation that's going to provide the people to fund, or fund it.
Yeah, we hear you, and we know that is the reality for a lot of people in this field. So we do need to come up with maybe a bunch of creative ways of making this work, and we can learn from other different professions, in this case social work, sometimes from Emma's experience, and also from counselling, but there are other professions, the art therapists and so on. I'm sure have some interesting models. So and this group supervision is a really nice group, and peer supervision is a really nice idea too, although because we're quite a young profession and still quite often quite isolated, that will often have to be online, which isn't the same, isn't ideal, but at least it's better than having nothing at all. So it does look like there is a role for us to think about creating that, either ahead of the professional body getting fully set up and accredited, or soon after. Jackie.
So I was just going to say two things really. Number one, where I work at Lindengate, obviously we have a review period after each session. So when our participants come in, we do a review post the session with the leads in the group. So that gives us the opportunity to pick up on any issues on the day. And recently, so that's how we operate at Lindengate. But recently I went on a course with a company called Gestalt, which is part of a psychotherapy and counselling approach. And where people working alone, they created like a buddying system, because they were standalone workers in their own practice, where they came together and they supported each other. So they were like a collective of individuals that wanted to either do case reviews, support one another, or get guidance. And they found that that was quite useful for them being self-employed or individual lone workers.
Can I ask which client group you work with in which setting, Jackie?
So I work in a social and therapeutic horticulture garden in Wendover, which is just outside Wendover in Bucks, and really work with people 13 to 97 who come in to enjoy horticulture and to develop their skills and handle social isolation.
Okay. And so just tell me a little bit more about how this supervision group worked for these.
Yeah, so the way that they worked, they came together periodically. Obviously, they were a forum that knew one another, recognised that they were working alone and needed that additional supervision and support. So they had colleagues that were working with a client base. They themselves were working with a client base, and they were able to bring particular cases, obviously anonymised, so that they could get guidance. And that's how they were able to get support, both in terms of the regulatory supervision and guidance that they need, but where they needed additional support, because it wasn't in line with their normal supervision, they were able to reach out to like-minded counsellors, psychotherapists to get that support.
Okay. And so this was done voluntarily. They didn't have to pay for this support.
No, they didn't. They were supporting each other, but it was a need that they all had. So it was also part of their personal development as well.
Okay, great. That's good to hear about that model. Thank you. And so these practitioners were sometimes getting support from people who worked with the same client group, but in a different therapeutic
setting.
Modality. Yeah. Lovely. Good to hear about that. Thank you.
That's okay.
Are there any other comments or anything in the chat, Emma?
Yeah, so we've got people mentioning the need for the supervisor relationship or the person supporting you for that to be an important thing, and it needs to be a supportive place so that people can reflect and feel listened to. And someone saying that peer-to-peer supervision for people working in isolated contexts would be great. Thinking more long-term, could the ASTH provide supervision training so that there's a possibility for group, peer or individual supervision to take place that practitioners can attend? And then someone mentioning that they have regular planned supervision, roughly monthly, with a senior member of staff, but the door is always open between those sessions, and that their health and well-being is treated as being equally important within those meetings. And then another person talking about that the association recognising the importance of regular supervision would help with other medical professionals making referrals to us, because they would know that we were, I guess, demonstrating a good level of practice through having good supervision. So lots of interesting comments. Thanks, Wendy.
Great, thank you. Has anyone got anything to share about how supervision has helped them in a particular situation, or how the lack of it has held them back? Is there anything else that anyone could share there? Because in my own experience, I have had situations where I've had the very bare minimum of training, let alone supervision, and just been left to get on with it when someone's sick with clients, and ended up, with someone with a cut finger because of a broken pane of glass in a greenhouse, and all sorts of hell breaking loose because, that's a risk assessment thing, but it was also just being left, with not enough support. So you can see how situations like that could be much more serious than a cut finger. Without the proper support structures and supervision, people could really end up getting into trouble. Leila.
In my experience, I work in a mental health hospital and I was supervised by the occupational therapist. And it was a regular meeting happening every month. And we could review cases as well as my performance. And it was very useful because you work every day with that person, but having the space to reflect about how things are going now, or how can I work better with a patient, it was very useful.
Thank you. I have also I have supervision in my job, which is not really doing any therapeutic sessions really very often anyway. And I have supervision with someone who knows the organization well, but is outside of it. And he really does help me reflect on my practice priorities. And I do find it really helpful. And you just feel supported. When you feel supported, you can work better, don't you? Oh, Christina.
Just from my experience, when I was starting out, the place I was working, there was a very good supervision for somebody like me who's very new, with a debrief at the end of each session and a supervisor who clearly was happy to listen. And so if I was not sure I was handling something the right way, because of their experience, they were really able to guide and say, well, that's because you don't know this about this person. And if you take that into account, then you'll understand why that's happening and that kind of thing. So at that entry level, a debrief at the end of each session was really helpful because I didn't carry the responsibility for the whole project. But I don't know what supervision that person was getting because I was not in a position to give them peer support. I didn't have the experience to do that. So I don't know what they were getting, but when I've, in a later job, been running something, then I have felt the need to have someone to bounce things off. I had support in the sense that if there was a safeguarding issue or an accident or something which needed reporting in that way, then I had someone to speak to, but I didn't have anybody who was within the profession at all and who would review things. So I would have a chat where I could with the volunteer who was helping me so that we did think about the clients, but I wasn't expecting her to give me advice and supervision in that sense. It was more me supporting her. Doing for her would have been done for me earlier on. So I think there are different contexts and the different degree of support and supervision that might be needed.
For sure. Yeah, and I know Emma's had experience of supervision training. Some others here and in the wider forum might have had too, but those things also, are good to have updated. And I think it would be nice to try and organize that in some form for members of the forum so that we can help boost that skill and that service within this fledgling profession. Because the trouble with a new profession, well, one of the problems is that we have very few people who have that sort of recognized level of experience and can call themselves a supervisor with some confidence. So it would be nice to start having that more formal structure of people who are able to be supervisors in a way of not matchmaking exactly, but helping people find someone with the relevant level of experience to supervise them at every stage of their work. Do you think, Emma, we should move on to or have we covered what would ideal supervision look like? Is Emma still there?
Emma's connection is gone. I think she's
no
longer with us.
Okay.
It feels like we've covered some really good ground, doesn't it? And
she's back. She's back.
Is she back?
Hi.
Great. I won't answer the question.
Hi, sorry, I'm here. Sorry, my Wi-Fi cut off there, so I'm back. Did I miss a question in particular?
Yeah, we were just asking if we think we've covered the third question about ideal supervision.
I think so. I think so, and I think it's clear that people have some really good ideas and that there is a role for carrying on and doing some more work looking at this properly and to make sure people have what they need and that we have some good guidance.
Great.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any concerns about supervision or any sense that it would just be a deal breaker for them, or that they would really struggle to find a way to get that support? Okay. Okay. Oh, Christina.
Yep, me again. Sorry. I do have a concern about potential concern about group peer support, because groups, as we all know, can acquire a life of their own. And I think Emma mentioned one earlier that she'd been part of, which was facilitated by somebody experienced. And I think if you just have a group of practitioners, there is the possibility of people reinforcing others' not great practice, or worse. So I would want to be a little bit careful about how groups were running. I mean, obviously, some supervision might be better than none, but it's just something to think about, maybe.
Emma, would you say something about your experience of peer supervision and how you kind of avoid that or safeguard against that? Or do you have a patchwork with some other forms built in?
I think, to be honest, I have experiences of both those situations. So definitely of completely peer group supervision, you need to be very clear and perhaps have a little bit of support right at the beginning in terms of setting up an agenda and making sure that what we used to do was we took it in turns to chair, and sometimes we would have people taking it in turns to share either a case example or some new research or good practice that they'd come across. And so that kind of helped us to make sure that we didn't have one person dominating. But that wasn't the only supervision we were getting. We were getting one-to-one outside of that. So I think then for a little while we did have a experienced practitioner come in and do our peer group supervision with us maybe quarterly, just to kind of touch base, make sure that things were sort of running in a healthy way for everybody and give us a bit of guidance if things were going off track. So I think there's ways of adapting it if it feels like that group's not working. But yeah, there definitely are some pitfalls that we need to think about.
Okay, thank you. We did have another slide, but I'm not sure it's necessary because I think we've made quite good progress. What do you think, Emma?
Yeah, I'd agree, Fiona. I think that's been a great discussion and I've taken loads of notes. So lots for us to reflect on and more work to do in that area.
Okay, there's another comment there, some guidance from Alison. Let me read the full comment. Here we go. Gosh, I think we need to have guidance out there on how to participate in supervision before making it mandatory. Otherwise, I can see people being very concerned. Yeah, absolutely. I think we want to start with it being a recommendation and maybe some guidance, and make that, try to get to a point where it becomes routine and most people are able to get it and people understand what it is and how to find it if they don't have it laid on in their whatever role they're in, and then start to see if we're in a position where we can say, right, this is the indicated amount, and then eventually maybe mandatory, but maybe not. And the fact that it's set at a certain level by certain bodies doesn't entirely go down well with lots of the practitioners and those other professional circles. So yeah, that's something for us to firm up later. I think absolutely it should be something more of a recommendation and guidance, and that you should have, but not something that's mandated. Did we miss any other comments? Yeah, that's Anna's where we got that one. Okay, and Bex, yeah. One-to-one, da-da-da. That sounds really good. Yeah. Lovely. Okay, I have a feeling we're going to end early this evening, so maybe that's good. Let's everyone get the best of the still lovely evening. Does anyone else have any other concerns or questions about supervision before we move on from this subject? Okay. Thank you so much for your contributions on that. And that's really helpful, as always. Gives us lots of more things to think about and develop our thinking there. I think it's time now to go back to Ben to hear a little bit, a very short bit, because it's only just beginning, about the competencies work. Ben.
Great, thanks so much for that, Fiona and Emma. Really appreciated that session. That was really helpful. So thank you so much. So yeah, just to give you a bit of background in terms of the competencies, this is going to be another one of the kind of key guiding documents for the association. The competencies will sit sort of distinct from the standards in the sense that the standards are about how the practitioners fulfill their roles, whereas sort of competencies are the abilities that the practitioners need at the point of registration, really, to be able to safely and effectively fulfill the role. So it's much more kind of skills based. It's focused around the abilities that we need to be able to practice. So I see if I can share. So what we're going to be doing is okay. So we're going to have a, can you see that one? Yeah? No? Ah, it didn't work. Try again.
Not yet.
Not yet. One more go.
Good evening, Daniela.
Here we go. Can you see that?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So we're going to be taking a similar approach to what we've done with the Code of Ethics and the practice standards, in the sense that we're going to establish a work party, and we'll be working towards kind of having a draft of competencies that we can bring via a survey again for broader feedback and together. So this is just to sort of give the sort of the outline of where we're going. We'll be developing a sort of a list of competencies to kind of demonstrate how, you know, so I've got a bar across my words, which isn't that helpful. So the abilities that practitioners need to fulfill their responsibilities in line with sort of the practice standards and the Code of Ethics. So again, it's kind of getting those documents to link together, and then we're going to work to build that into sort of easily understandable language. Why do we need competencies? It's to guide sort of the registrants in terms of personal development and practice. It gives that kind of real detailed information that can support, you know, where are the areas that, you know, I want to strengthen my abilities, I want to develop, can help to guide that. It can support in terms of our sort of routes to registration, in the sense of, you know, not only for the individuals looking and thinking, am I ready to be registered as a social and therapeutic horticulture practitioner, in the sense, do I have these abilities that are in the competencies? And it can also support those decisions for the people, you know, on the panel looking at registrants. Can they see these abilities demonstrated at the point of registration? It's also going to support us in looking at things like decisions around which training courses can be included on the routes to registration, because it links in terms of, you know, what those training courses are teaching. And it can support the training providers as well, because in a sense, the training providers can look at it and say, these are the abilities that we need to train, these are the skills that we need to build up. So it's a really important document, and it links to lots of other places as well. As I say, we'll be looking at other documents. We'll kind of draw in from other professions, and we'll draw on some of the knowledge from Trellis and from Thrive, and we'll bring that together. We've got an initial draft document that will go to the work party. The work party will then kind of build on it, refine it. We'll have a few meetings kind of looking at it and really going over it, clarifying, identifying if there's any gaps. And then we'll refine that through, you know, a few different meetings. And then, as I say, the output of that work party will be a sort of first draft that the consultative forum can look at, and we can get that sort of broader review, agreement, and feedback in as well. So I'm hoping that we'll have the work party sort of set up by May. I've done an invite out to volunteers, and I've had a few replies. So many thanks to those that have been willing to join that group, and we'll look forward to getting started. Hopefully by May. Let's aim for the first meeting before May. That'd be really great. So that's what we're working towards, and that gives you a bit of a sort of introduction to where we're going in terms of the competencies and what we're trying to achieve through that document as well. So I'm happy to take questions or to hand straight back to Fiona.
Thank you, Ben. I think the original idea to discuss competency as well, it was always kind of implied in this work, but I think because we've been looking at that with the European network as well, it seems important that we have a clear list here. And of course, it should underlie the training courses that we have. You know, those should all be geared towards making sure people have the relevant competencies so that they're able to register. So it is a fundamental piece of work. But again, hopefully it should just formalize what most of you are already doing or skilled in. It shouldn't be a massive shock and news. That's the thinking or the hope. Sally.
Sorry, mouse had wandered again. I recall that we did have like an initial document that was presented at one of these forums that sort of, I feel, was the start of this work. Is that what the draft based on? Do you remember it was routes to registration, and it had?
Yeah, so that's a different document. The routes to registration document is with the 3 columns and the different approaches that people could take in order to be registered.
But that still had some competencies defined in it, didn't it, effectively? Because you had to have had certain qualifications. But
yes.
That not it feeds into this, doesn't it?
Yeah, so it's a linked document. So the routes to registration says, you know, it's the qualifications that you need, or the experience that you need from one end through to the other. Whereas the competencies is a much more detailed look at
so it's a drill down,
specific abilities related to the profession as a whole, which is sort of relevant across all the different routes to registration. Whichever route to registration people take, they'll need all the competencies. But yeah, that document's more kind of slightly different, but very much aligned.
Level of detail above. Okay, I was trying to understand where it all sat together.
Yeah, sure.
Is there any plan to include anything around hours of practice, like work? You know, hours of work experience. I don't know whether it falls into the competencies or whether it falls into routes to registration, but it's something that I haven't seen being articulated. I was just interested to know whether that was going to fall part of the plans.
It's sort of there in the routes to registration. It's beginning to take shape in there. It's not down to hours as much as more like years or
I was loosely using the term, but it is more. Because certain professions do that, don't they? Where you have to have done a certain amount of time, and it doesn't matter what the unit is. It's more that process. So we are thinking of including some of that in this work.
I think especially in the 3rd column of the routes to registration, where you haven't come through a formal qualification route. And you're patching together experience and maybe a few other smaller, shorter courses or courses that are more partially aligned to this field. So then a certain number of hours or weeks or months or years of practice could be part of the application. I'm winging it slightly because I haven't read the routes to recognition draft in some time, but
I was it was an initial draft, wasn't it? But has that been published? I must admit I haven't roamed around the Trellis website recently, so I don't know.
Well, it's a good job because it's been in some disarray. But it's on there. There is a download or a link. Yeah, you should find it there. And it is very draft. It's much more early draft than some of the other pieces of work.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think some of the thinking about the course we're developing in Scotland is that we might have a placement requirement. So, you know, that that sort of showing that you've done some practice is common to a lot of therapeutic professions, and I think a good thing to have, but maybe not necessarily relevant to every path into the career, into this role, into the profession.
Yeah, that sounds like a good thing to have, though, certainly.
Yeah, and it should be valued, of course. Alison.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think this is an absolute key fundament of, you know, of the association, because so many people are second careerers. I mean, at the moment, I don't think there's anybody who sort of does a. Hang on, wait a minute. I'm just going to drop my hand. You know, I don't know anybody who's sort of come out of school or college and says, I want to be in a STH. The profession is too new, isn't it? Recognised as such. So I think, I mean, certainly I got a very weird background and pulled all sorts of skills in, and then struggled around to, you know, plug gaps that this was a while, you know, way back, you know, that I perceived, you know, so I did the counselling course because I perceived there was some need there. I'd done mental health first aid, you know, so people, I think, scrabble around conscious that wherever they've come from, you know, if they've come from healthcare, then they might have gaps in horticulture. So actually one fairly detailed list that people can go through and say, oh gosh, well, I've done that, and I've done, you know, and I'm closer than I think, or I've got a gap here, or wow, I didn't know you needed to know that in order to be comfortable in this role. So yeah, I just think this is an absolute fundament of, you know, of what we're doing. So
great.
And it would have been really helpful for me a few years ago.
Yeah, I think having a weird background in lieu of having, you know, I think a weird background is almost like essential to be in this group at the moment. And then, you know, hopefully we then have a new cohort of people coming in who can just go zip straight through the training course and in through a career route. I mean, that's the only way we're going to have a proper sustainable profession, if we make it easy for people rather than phoning up the Trellis office and saying, how do I get into this work? And me saying, well, I'm really sorry, but we still, you know, recommend you go and do some volunteer work somewhere and, you know, top your hours. And yeah, it's not satisfactory, is it, at all? So yeah, I'm glad you see it as so relevant. Any other comments about this is without even anything being unveiled, but the competencies? Okay, well, thanks for those comments. We will, of course, do it in the same process where we reveal a draft in as good a form as we can get it, and then it will be over to you to hear what you think and unpick it and throw rotten eggs at it until we get it right. So that will be, again, a very consultative process, as we've done so far. Well, in the spirit of wrapping up just slightly early now, I just have a couple of last items. Thank you, Ben, for introducing the competencies to us. I realise that there are other areas in which we will need some sort of policy and process documentation created, and we have begun to talk about that with the operational group, policies on certain areas like disclosures and so on. And so we are aware of that, and we're beginning to think about that and work on it, Christina especially. So there are these other bits of work going on in the background just to make you aware of that. And finally, for me, I wanted to point out that next month, coming up very soon, is World Therapeutic Horticulture Day. Thank you, Anna, for the enthusiasm. And this is a truly global event. And the real aim of that is to achieve recognition for this profession. So it's very relevant to this group, this forum. And we can't have recognition without awareness. And so the idea is very simple. We're producing some free resources that will be available to download from the Trellis website and from a Google Drive. And the idea is that you do something in your area and promote that, share it on social media or in the press or whatever works for you, and use these resources too, the logo, the hashtags, the slides and reels that we'll make for Instagram, and the poster or PDF for LinkedIn and various formats. So there are a few dates running up to the date on the 18th of May. So when we'll be sharing those things, but you can register your interest. I'm hoping to run another planning group meeting on the 30th of this month, I think. So if you're interested in joining that, just get in touch. But really, if you can take part, that would be great. If you've got nothing going on in your area and you don't have time to organise an activity there, just share the stuff that we're going to make available. It just helps because we're all using the same hashtag, so it starts to become more visible on social media, and hopefully if we get some legacy media interested too, that begins to raise awareness. We were on the BBC last year, so we started to get a wee bit more better known. So that's just a call to action for you to join in with World Day, if possible. A second call to action to have a look at the practice standards and send us your feedback, please. And I just want to check that none of the Trellis team or anyone else here tonight has anything else they'd like to add at this point that I might have forgotten. Okay. Okay, well, thank you once again for all your time. And I hope you feel encouraged by the progress. You know, it goes at a certain rate because we don't have a huge amount of resources to spend on this, but I think it's going at a good enough rate to keep us all encouraged. Certainly I feel positive about it, so I hope you do too. The next meeting is on October, so the link and the details will be on the website as usual. But does anyone have the date there in their diary? I should have that, shouldn't I?
7th of October it is.
7th?
7th of October.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, put that in your diary and I look forward to seeing you then. And meanwhile, World Therapeutic Horticulture Day, it's a Sunday, 18th of May, but we encourage people to share stuff in the week running up to that. And I should say, we're having 3 special seminars with Alison, who's here tonight, sharing her research, Emma sharing research that we've been involved in with the University of Edinburgh, and our master's student from last year, Suzanne Fox, sharing her research as well that week running up to World Day. So tune in for those if you would. All right, we'll see you then.